You know, I did a video on false flags recently, which enumerated the criterion for spotting a false flag. So anyway, I started to think about it, and I decided to apply that to the Las Vegas Massacre that occurred a few years ago, and the results were pretty stark. So today I'm going to give you the lowdown on this event and show you why I think it might have been a false flag. First of all, ISIS claimed responsibility. I mean, the event occurred and ISIS came out and said, we did it. And everyone chose not to believe them. But, you know, they said we did it. And it happened on the Feast of Ashura, which is a Muslim high holy day. And, you know, I don't really know exactly why it's a high holy day. I don't want to know. But here's a list of major terrorist events between 1940 and 2015, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, that all occurred on this day. So there must be something, it seems like there's something significant about this particular day. But let's move on. In a little bit, I'm going to tell you the significance of the government's rejection that ISIS did it, and I'll show you why that's significant. But for right now, let's take a look at the prospect that there might have been more than one shooter than this guy Paddock. And you'll see throughout the video there's some evidence to suggest that there was more than one shooter. But let's just take a look and see what the old sheriff had to say right after the event.
Do you think this was all accomplished on his own? Self-value, face value. You got to make the assumption that he had to have some help at some point, and we want to ensure that that's the answer. Maybe he's a super guy. Maybe he superhero, not a hero, a super. You know, I won't use the word. Maybe he's, you know, a super Yahoo that was working out all this on his own. But it'd be hard for me to believe that.
So here's a guy who would know about it. He's the sheriff, and he's convinced that he had to have had some help. There are also police radio transmissions that state there were multiple shooters. A second shooter confirmed in the Mandalay Bay, and there was somebody who talked about being a shooter at one of the gates at the concert. The source I found said Gate 7, but I looked it up and there is no Gate 7, only 1 through 6. But at any rate, there were some reports, some credible reports, that there was more than one shooter. This hotel suite that Paddock was occupying had more than one entrance and exit. And you'll see the significance of that right here. But on October 4th, the Mandalay Bay employees leaked a copy of an in-room dining receipt which showed Stephen Paddock ordering food for 2 people in his room. And then there's a copy of the receipt right there, photograph. Then electronic door locks showed 2 doors, both opening simultaneously twice on the day of the shooting. So they had electronic locks that could monitor, you know, the number of times that the door had been opened and closed and when it had been done. But in this next one here, I found this from one source. There were 3 women registered to the room. The names were never released, and no one knows who they are. That was from an interview that a guy named Stu Peters did with a researcher. And Stu Peters is a notorious crackpot, so take this with a grain of salt. But supposedly there were 3 women registered in that room, in addition to Paddock, and their names were never released. No one knows who they were. At this point, I'm going to throw in a few little factoids that I think raise some eyebrows, and I'll just read them off right here. Las Vegas is believed to be the most heavily surveilled location on Earth. Yet no video has been released of Stephen Paddock transporting all the bags of firearms up to his room, because he had a bunch in that room. Neither is there any footage of him and only him entering and leaving his hotel room as stated in the official narrative. Police officers after the fact, ex post facto, said that he had an arsenal in there, and there's some photographs of it floating around on the internet. See, Las Vegas is the kind of place that would attract criminals, pickpockets, robbers, what have you. And that's bad for business out in Vegas. So they've got that place surveilled like you wouldn't believe, because they do not want criminals fleecing and robbing their guests. Then there was an Hispanic woman who was eventually escorted out of the Route 91 concert by police. Showed up 45 minutes before the event and began yelling, "You're all gonna die." No one knows who this woman was or where she is. Now, if it's the most heavily surveilled place on earth, don't you think they would have some surveillance video of her? And if so, don't you think they could use facial recognition software to determine her identity, or at least look for her? But, you know, we never heard anything more about it. Then shooting survivor Kimberly Schomel, 28, was found dead in her bed on October 9th. She died between 4:30 and 8:30 a.m. after her husband had left for work. Kimberly was extremely vocal, stating that there were other shooters in the crowd at the concert. She had made it known on social media that she was organizing a survivors group to come forward about the multiple shooters at the event, which is covered up by the Las Vegas Police Department and the FBI. So here's this woman who apparently knew what she was doing, starts yelling up and down that there were multiple shooters, and sure enough, she dies in bed mysteriously just a few days after the event. And this last one raises some eyebrows with me. If you're a firearms aficionado, as I am, this one doesn't make any sense at all. He was a multimillionaire, yet he didn't have any optics on the weapons. You know? I mean, if you're going to be shooting at people from hundreds of yards away, which he was, you'd put a scope on your weapon. Optics are very expensive, but, you know, he was a multimillionaire. He could have had all the optics he wanted, and yet he didn't have any, which suggests to me that, well, I'll tell you what it suggests to me a little bit later, but that just raises all kinds of eyebrows with me. And also, when in doubt, follow the money. That's your best red flag if you can follow that and find anomalies. On September 5th of 2017, James J. Morin, chairman and CEO of MGM Resorts International, divested of $9.9 million, or 80% of his personal stock, just 3 weeks before the shooting event. If the price of the stock would have dropped, he stood to make a fortune buying it back at a lower value, which it did drop. And it wasn't just him. There were two other executives who did the same thing. I distinctly remember hearing about that at the time. However, I couldn't find any references to those two others today. Things conveniently disappear on the internet these days. And then this next one, man, this reminds me of 9/11. According to SEC filings, George Soros bought $42 million worth of put options on the MGM company from mid-August. He stood to make a fortune if the price of the stock fell, which it did fall. Now, I don't really understand exactly what a put option is, other than it is a bet that the stock will go down. And he did it. Just like 9/11, there were tons of put options put on those two airlines before the event. So right there, you've got some major red flags, and they're unambiguous. Okay, now let's get back to the multiple shooter angle here. I'm going to play you some audio recordings of the event, and then you can hear for yourself to determine whether or not you think that there was more than one weapon being discharged. Now, I heard two distinct firearms being discharged. I heard a low-caliber weapon similar to an AR-15, and then I heard a much more higher-caliber weapon that had the rate of fire of a belt-fed machine gun. And let's take a look at, let's listen to this one right over here. Now, I don't see how anyone could listen to that and not conclude that there was more than one weapon being discharged. Now, let's look at this video here. Here's a fella. He's gonna actually play. He's actually gonna fire two of these weapons. Listen here. There's an AR-15.
Oh, shit. Seriously, I don't know what's going on.
Okay, now he's going to play both recordings. He's going to overlap them and play them simultaneously. And let's just hear. Let's just listen to what he does here. Okay, even when played simultaneously, there's no difference. You can't tell any difference. So anyway, to me, that really kind of cinches it. There was one AR-15 being fired with the bump stock, and then there was also a belt-fed machine gun firing at 600 rounds per minute being fired as well. Now, here is a little check sheet to look for false flags to help you identify what might be a false flag. Okay, you're going to have instant media saturation. Well, that's obvious. All major media outlets start barking out the same message, but local sources might report differently at first. So now, remember the police officers who all said that they thought that there was more than one shooter and that the guy had help? You heard that initially, but then that disappeared, didn't it? Major media starts proposing what will later be implemented. Now, they all start talking about gun control. However, in this particular case, they wanted to ban bump stocks, which they did. Major media will not question the official narrative. Anything that contradicts the official narrative is labeled as a conspiracy theory and laughed at. Then, of course, you always have to have a scapegoat. You have Mr. Paddock. He was your scapegoat. Never mind that ISIS took responsibility. Oh, no. We know this guy did it. So they scapegoated this guy, even though other criminal organizations took credit for it. And then there are always important anomalies and questions, and we've been going over those for the last 10 minutes or so. I've been showing you those. And there are also patterns to look for. Down here in white, drills are the number one pattern. I mean, whenever you start hearing about drills, you know something's probably fishy. You'll have commemorative slogans appear out of nowhere and start being pushed forward. And then there's a seamless integration across all media, social media, television, networks. So anyway, let's just take a look here. Okay, drills. And looky here. DHS held mass shooting terror drills weeks before the Las Vegas Massacre. So there's your drill right there. The drill dovetails with an October 3rd IntelliHub report titled Vegas Union Worker Blows Whistles on Mandatory Active Shooter Training, which was due September 30th at 12 a.m., which exposed that active shooter training was, in fact, being privately, at least, in one casino prior to the massacre. So there you have drills. Okay, you have links to intel organizations. I forgot to read that off from the previous checklist, but that's one of the things you look for. Does the so-called shooter have links to the intelligence organizations? And I'll just read this. If you look at the website FlightWare.com and search a tail number N5343M, you will see that the N number belongs to an SR-20 that at one time was registered to Stephen C. Paddock of Mesquite, Texas, and Henderson, Nevada. Our shooter, you will see that it is currently registered to a company out of Roanoke, Virginia named Volant LLC. This company works with the defense intelligence community per their website. So right there's a link to the intelligence community. And then now you have commemorative slogans popping up. Las Vegas strong. Vegas strong. Looks pretty obvious to me. And then another one of the items on the checklist that I didn't mention was that the story disappears pretty quickly. And, you know, for such a big event, you'd think that it would have lingered along more than about a week. It stayed in the news cycle about a week and a half, and then it just went away. Now, this is my conspiracy theory. It's purely conjecture on my part, a supposition. I think the guy was a gun runner. He was selling guns to people. I'm not the only one who suspected that, but I think he had all those guns up in that hotel room as samples, and he was going to show them to a prospective buyer. But when the buyer showed up, they killed him and then picked up those weapons that were just laying around and started blasting away at the crowd. That would explain why he didn't have any optics for the weapons. You know, the guys showed up and they turned out to be a bunch of ISIS guys. Maybe he knew they were ISIS guys, or maybe they just gave him a little surprise. But they killed him and then they just started blasting away for a little bit, and then they ran off. That's my personal conspiracy theory. Totally conjecture on my part, just a supposition, but to me it seems to make sense. And you might say, well, why didn't anybody see him running off? Well, I mean, as you've seen, obviously there was some help being generated from the inside. You know, the surveillance just suddenly disappeared. You didn't get any surveillance video of him coming in with the weapons in the first place. You know, the guy who owned MGM, or the CEO, he divested himself of all his stocks. They knew that it was going to happen. Somebody knew it was going to happen. Anyway, that's what I think. And I think after having watched this, you might conclude that at least the whole thing is pretty suspicious. I don't see how anyone could think that it's not suspicious.
Everyone stayed down, and as soon as everyone started to get up to run, they just kept shooting, and it was like literally like 5 minutes of just shooting, and people just kept dropping. And it was definitely someone on the ground, most definitely. The way they herded the crowd and all of us, and then they kept coming. They even came into the back staff parking lot and shot people out there too. So they just kept coming. And I hope they get them.
And what was the reaction?